Hi, welcome to Beyond the Filter. I'm your host, Liz Ryerson. I'm here with Frank Cifaldi. Hi, Frank.
Hi, how are you, Liz?
Do you want to talk a little bit about just like your background, how you got into game journalism and also got interested in like games preservation and prototypes and that kind of stuff?
I would say that it all kind of started when I got my first computer, which was in 1998. My grandmother bought it for me with her bingo winnings. So I grew up in Las Vegas, and
wow.
you could have bingo winnings if you were in Las Vegas. And she made me promise not to tell anyone that she bought me a computer, but I guess I've now broken that. Because I had like 9 cousins, and she didn't want any of them to know that she bought me a computer. That's kind of a big deal.
That's a pretty good origin story.
Yeah. And that was 1998. It was, whatever garbage was at Best Buy. And along with that first computer was, my first access to the internet. I got an AOL account, and I wasn't playing video games really at the time. I was still in high school. I grew up playing games because we all did. I should just say I'm 35, born in 82. So just to put you in the right place, like I grew up with an NES. I had a subscription to Nintendo Power like we all did. And
well, I didn't, but I'm a little bit younger, so.
Yeah, sure. So, I grew up playing it, and I got a Sega Genesis in like 92 or something. And then, I don't know, I just kind of grew out of games, I guess. It was just, they were toys, So I was in high school. I was a lot more into music, playing music. I had a guitar. And when I got the internet, I just started poking around with it, looking up stuff I knew, stuff I used to like, and just sort of ended up looking up, old video games that I remembered. And in doing that, discovered emulation. Emulators, the ability for me to download these old games I grew up with and play them on my computer, which was, that was mind-blowing for me.
Yeah, no, I think 98 is around the time I discovered emulators too, because I think that's the time that they started to become people became more aware of them, and they became more like of a thing because of like Nesticle and some of those other programs.
Yeah, absolutely. Like 98, 99, that's when you see, ROM sites on like Tripod and GeoCities and stuff. That's when it became accessible, I guess. It's funny, I thought about this recently, and I think 98 is when emulators started having GUIs instead of just being command line. And I think that had a lot to do with it. I think that's how a lot of us discovered emulation, is that, it was no longer difficult to make them run. Anyway, so I discovered emulation, sort of went down that rabbit hole, and in a lot of weird ways started getting interested in wanting to understand where these games that I'm downloading came from. Like, how did they get there? Who were these people who were like copying the games and putting them onto the internet, and what else was out there? What obscure games are there for me to play that I might like? And I don't know if that's just a personality type or if that's like an age thing. So I was, I don't know, 17 maybe. And Frank Cifaldi at 17 was the kind of person where if he liked a band a lot, he had to hear every deep cut ever recorded,
Get on like whatever the file sharing service
well, there wasn't one yet. It was actually more like it was more like buying bootlegs at record shops and stuff like that. And importing singles off of eBay, which was a thing at the time. And so I think I just had that sort of mind and thought process to old video games, and maybe specifically NES games, which is what I was mostly playing with, which, I don't know, the interest in exploring the back catalog, the interest in sort of knowing where these digital files came from, and also I tell this story a lot, and I don't know if it's actually true, or if I've just convinced myself it's true, but I know that I saw a documentary about film preservation sometime around then, or maybe earlier. They talked to probably Scorsese, I don't know, or someone else from the Film Foundation.
Yeah, usually I've seen Scorsese does a lot of like film preservation stuff, or is like involved in that.
Well, he's one of the founders of the Film Foundation. You know, I don't know how much actual work he does, but he's definitely the face of it because he's Martin Scorsese.
Yeah.
So of course he is. But you know, the Film Foundation has this statistic that they often bring out that I know they brought out in this documentary because I remember it, which is that I believe it's 80% of American cinema before 1930 is gone. We can't locate it, and that's for a lot of reasons, but primarily because there was no reason to hold on to a film. There was no such thing as a secondary market for a movie. You know, you'd run it, you'd sell it to theaters, and that was it. There weren't even TVs yet, so there was no notion of home video ever becoming a thing. But anyway, that stuck with me, and as I was seeing the efforts people were going through to find the remaining like old cartridge video games and copy the data off of them and put them online, and how they were still, searching for really rare ones or for, prototype games that never came out. I think the two sort of clicked in my head, and it became a cause of mine to help this out, to involve myself in tracking down rare video games and making sure that their data was online. And I don't think I was calling it preservation at the time, but that's what it was. That's what we were doing. We were finding video game history and preserving it. And so I did that for a little while. I think after a while, I sort of started thinking about, well, what's the highest impact I could have? Like, what's the kind of video game that is most in danger of disappearing? And what I kind of landed on was games that never shipped to stores, unreleased games. And so I started a website in 2003 called Lost Levels, which, as far as I know, was the first website that specifically documented unreleased video games. Long story short, really, like I was, we were not just tracking down these games, but I was also trying to figure out what their stories were, talk to the people who made them, stuff like that. So I was doing journalism and kind of caught the attention of editors who were working on video game websites and magazines, and started getting job offers. Not like come work for us full time, but it's like, hey, do you want to review terrible Game Boy Advance games for us? Sort of. My first review was Max Payne on the Game Boy Advance for.
They give you the dregs, like the handheld games that no one wants to play.
Yeah. Oh, they were almost all like the Game Boy ports of 3D console games. Because that used to be a thing. I guess that's no longer a thing. We don't really have that anymore. But I mean,
we have the Switch, which is 100% handheld and a full console too. So
yeah, you literally play the home game in your hand, and it's funny to think about because I think it was pretty much before our time, or we were right on the cusp, where the idea of playing an arcade game faithfully at home was sort of the same thing, right? Where like you got the home version of Contra or whatever, and it's not quite as good. Well, I prefer it personally, but it's objectively not as good as the arcade game, just because they couldn't. And but we grew up in the second phase of that, where like, oh, you can't play the real one on the go. You're gonna play the weird downgraded version of it. But
yeah, and if you ended up with that game, it's always like,
thanks, Grandma.
Yeah, you're kind of like disappointed. It's like, why do I want to play Game Boy Perfect Dark? Why can't I just play?
Was there a Perfect Dark on Game Boy?
Yeah, there was a Perfect Dark game. I think it came out after. I forget what it's like a Game Boy Color game.
Okay. I didn't play that one, but I played the 007 game that came out around GoldenEye.
Wow, so that would have been like a Game Boy.
It was black and white, actually.
Black and white. Oh, okay.
And I don't know if it was officially GoldenEye tied in or not. I think it was, actually. But it's a genre that I love, which is overhead Zelda-style game on the Game Boy where you don't necessarily fight stuff all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like a walking around overhead tile-based thing with goofy sprites and sort of bad combat. but with
I think
talking and inventory, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at those games as their own thing rather than like, you know, the Perfect Dark or GoldenEye or whatever, then they can be really interesting. But you have to kind of look at them as their own entity.
Well, and as a developer, you have to enjoy that, you know? Like, I like working with IP. I think it's fun. And I think that for the right kind of person who's given an IP and sort of has these constraints to work with, like, I think that's a fun challenge for some people, and I think that good games can come from that.
That's true.
But anyway, where was I? Oh, I was reviewing games and sort of became a video game journalist. Ended up fairly quickly, actually, getting hired for real at gamasutra.com in 2005. And that's when I moved from Vegas to San Francisco. And did that for a while. Worked at a company called GameTap for a while, which was a games on demand service. It was kind of like digital Netflix, but with video games.
It's weird that never caught on. Like, I mean, I know that people are still trying to do that now. Like, every once in a while, I'll hear about someone making that for, like, indie PC games.
Right.
But it never seems to have caught on. I don't know.
I don't know how you would, and I could talk about this forever, so I'll try to restrain myself.
Okay.
But I suspect... Okay, I have a couple predictions. One is that companies that have money are going to wake up to video games being a thing, and they're going to start buying up the rights to old games to build a giant catalog. Because, number two, I predict that there will be networks of games. And like any cable network when it starts, like Netflix when it started, when you start, you license a ton of content, and your play is come watch a million things, right? Mm-hmm. Like when any cable, like, I don't know, when the Game Show Network started, right? They'd licensed like a million old game shows, and that's what they played all the time. They had a ton of content. And then, you know, Cartoon Network was the same thing. If you remember when they launched, it was, you know, you tune into Cartoon Network and it'd be like, we have a 1,000 Hanna-Barbera cartoons. You know? And then as time progresses, that giant catalog starts appearing less and less frequently as they create original content. And then eventually that network becomes all original content. We're seeing that right now with Netflix, right? You go on Netflix and it's almost all Netflix original.
Yeah, because they lost a lot of the...
Right.
If you wanna find a movie that you like, you probably can't find it on Netflix.
Right, but I would say that that doesn't matter to them, that they have established themselves as a network, and that giant catalog is for the next service to start off with. And I suspect that games will be the same way, and I suspect that whoever licenses the giant back catalog of old video games that no one actually wants to play is gonna make a lot of money licensing that catalog to game networks. But Turner Broadcasting, who I worked for, didn't have that luxury. They just had a bunch of disparate companies that had game licenses that they had individual contracts for, and probably spent way too much on. I don't. I went through the contracts for fun sometimes when I was there, and good Lord, did we pay companies like EA way too much. I mean, just absurd amounts of money for like the DOS Ultima games, which no one wants to play them.
I mean, a very small. I think it has probably a very small contingent of people who do, but it's a very small one.
It's a very small contingent. And then when you consider that 90% of that contingent knows what DOSBox is, it becomes even smaller.
Yeah, you're right. Like, a lot of the people who are more knowledgeable are going to to be a lot more savvy about other ways of accessing and playing those games.
Yeah, absolutely. But GameTap was an interesting product. You know, we had like 1,000+ games at one point. Until we lost a contract and it dipped below 900. And they tried to do the original content thing also. So the first couple seasons of Sam and Max from Telltale were actually produced by us and funded by us.
Oh.
like Telltale made them, but we were sort of the interim publisher, I guess. They were like GameTap originals.
Oh, that's interesting. I remember when that first game came out because I remember playing it with a friend.
Yeah, it was cool. It was kind of neat to see adventure games back again, but these Telltale games still look like Sam and Max Season 1 to me. It's kind of weird.
They didn't change the engine that they're using. And anyway, we're
oh, sure. Anyway, yeah. So I worked there for a while, and it was a lot of sort of like figuring out how to promote and present older games to people, among other things. I had a million tasks there, and then when that sort of didn't go under, I got sold to some French guys, and most of us got let go. After that, I kind of got back into journalism and worked at oneup.com for a while, where I ran the features and the news as the editor. And I think that's where a lot of like people know me from, weirdly. Like a lot of my Twitter followers and stuff I think are from those days, because if you worked at OneUp, you were very publicly visible, because they stuck cameras on you all the time.
OneUp has a cool reputation now because they don't exist anymore also.
Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. Like, I was at that cool website that has a mythical status because if you go try to read the articles now, they're broken. No, but it was a cool place to work. It was fun. It was fun being able to, like, just do weird video game streams before Twitch was a thing. And, have someone else actually set up the equipment and stuff. And then a little more journalism stuff after that. Went back to Gama Sutra for a while, freelance for a few places. Ended up getting into development, which you mentioned at the beginning of the show. I got hired at a studio called Other Ocean in Emeryville, California, right next to Oakland where I am. And did a few things there. The first thing I worked on, which I don't really talk about much because no one played it, we did a new version of Hexic, if you remember that game. It was a puzzle.
I don't know that game.
Yeah, it's okay. It's a puzzle game that I believe Alexei Pajitnov originally did, the Tetris guy. It's a Microsoft-owned game about rotating hexagons to match their colors.
He also designed a game called Hatris, didn't he?
He did. He absolutely did, yeah. And I believe Weltris was him also. I would make a joke about how he doesn't know how to do anything else, but in reality, it was the publisher putting Tris on the games to sell them. So, to be fair to Alexei, they were very different games. But we did a version of Hexic that was exclusive to the Windows 8 store.
Oh.
So that's why no one's heard of it. The Windows 8 store was hilarious. You'd go there and like the top 3 games would be knockoff Pac-Man, like actually called Pac-Man. It was really bad. It was just a weird desert of piracy, the Windows store.
That makes me think of all the Pac-Man clones that I played on DOS too. Like I had one called CD Man, and there were tons.
Yeah, I had a bunch on Amiga, because actually my dad had an Amiga when I was a kid. I said that was my first computer, the Windows one, but I sort of had one at my dad's house a little bit too, and yeah, we had some Pac-Man clones. But Hexic was fun because I just wrote dialogue for this like tutorial character, who we named Hexy, who because it was a Microsoft game, I determined that our canon was that it was Clip It, the helpful
the paperclip?
The paperclip, yeah, because the paperclip could shapeshift. So the canon for Hexic 8 was that it was Clip It, but being a hexagon, helping you out. So I brought back Clip It, even though no one knows that.
When he comes back as a meme again, inevitably you can take credit for that.
Absolutely, yeah. Like the first line in the game is I see you're playing Hexic. Would you like help?
I feel like that. I feel like it's sad because there are a lot of people who wouldn't get that joke now. But
Yeah.
I'm sure it'll come back through some like other weird back channel, just like a lot of memes are like media from a long time ago, and people who are getting into them now are not necessarily people who grew up with it. So
Right.
they'll experience it via that nostalgia, I guess.
I hope so.
That's interesting, actually. That's an interesting thing to talk about later about nostalgia via nostalgia. Like there's like people who grow up like not with Nintendo or whatever, but are growing up playing like Shovel Knight or something.
Oh yeah, no, I'd love to talk about that.
Anyway, continue.
First, I have to brag about one thing during Hexic's development. So the dialogue had to go through Microsoft approval, and I don't remember if we shipped with this or not, but like the story that I had was basically that if you get through all the levels, you get hired at Microsoft for some cushy position. And I don't remember the exact line that I wrote, but it was something along the lines of if you're an executive at Microsoft, you get your own son. You don't have to use the pedestrian son. And I got a note back from Microsoft Legal saying cannot imply that Microsoft owns the sun.
Oh man,
I'm proud of that. That's the only reason I want to talk about Hexic, was to brag about that in some public space, because I've never been able to.
That's not as good as the famous Simcopter story, but
oh sure, that's true. Yeah, because that actually shipped in the game too.
Yeah, well, and that launched the guy's career as a
right.
one of the guys from the Yes Men. But
yes, that totally. Yeah. Oh, I love that story. So I worked on that.
I feel like I should mention what the story is.
Yeah, go for it, please.
But the whole thing was a guy who was a Maxis employee put this thing into the game Simcopter, where if like, I don't know, a certain set of conditions are met that are fairly rare, like a bunch of naked men will just come running and gather. I don't know exactly what happens, but it involves lots of naked men.
Yeah.
And anyway, it made it into the game, and people eventually found out, and yeah, the Maxis was not very happy, and I think he was fired or something. But now he's part of the Yes Men, and his whole career is to prank. So it launched somebody's career, I guess. I say that also because I know Maxis used to be based in Emeryville, which is
yes. Yeah, I actually, like in the cafe next to Other Ocean, I see Will Wright in there once in a while. So like it's all we're still Maxis and Pixar town over there. Do you know about the Sims Kiss too?
No.
So when they first demonstrated the Sims, the original one, at E3, during the live demonstration, I believe it was two women Sims kissed romantically, which was not like in the design spec that was meant to be there. I don't know if it was necessarily a bug or like a guy was working off an old spec or something. But same-sex romance exists in The Sims ultimately because they accidentally showed it happen at E3.
Yeah, I like how fluid the sexuality is in everybody in The Sims. It's very progressive in that way, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that
accidentally
was,
so.
Right, and I think that was the original design was like that, and I think the engineer was working off the original sort of skeletal design and didn't have like the updated docs, So I think that's how sexuality got so fluid in The Sims was he was working off of old documentation, and then the public saw it, and so they didn't fix it.
Well, it makes more sense that all of your Sims should be able to flirt with all the other ones instead of like making a gender divide. So
absolutely,
it's more elegant in a way also.
Yeah. And I don't know. I think it's a better representation of human desire as a computer system. It's like not having arbitrary restrictions. but where was I? I did Hexic.
You were working at Other Ocean.
Yeah, I worked on some concept stuff that I didn't really work on the game for. Like I worked on conceptualizing. We did a mobile game called NBA Rush. So the NBA, well, actually no, a publisher wanted us to do an official National Basketball Association game that was an endless runner. If you remember that genre.
Yes, I remember that because of Cannibalt. Cannibalt is actually like tangentially part of the reason why I got interested in indie games.
Oh, that's interesting.
But yeah, that game was really big for a while.
Yeah, and well, and I think it kind of inspired the mobile endless runners like Subway Surfer, and I don't even know, Temple Run would be another good one.
Yeah, this is around like 2009-ish, 2009, 2010, something like that.
Yeah, I think it was 2012 when we got the assignment, or maybe 2011. Anyway, it was the National Basketball Association and a runner, which I thought was really silly. So I was like, well, we should, if we're gonna make people pay attention to this, let's just make it silly. Let's make it a game about there's a Martian invasion, and no one can stop them except the National Basketball Association.
It sounds like Barkley's Shut Up and Jam Gaiden.
Yeah, it kind of does. Yeah, and it was like the idea was you're running down the street, bouncing a basketball for no reason, because you're in the NBA. That's what you do, and just
perpetually bouncing a basketball.
Absolutely, yeah. And you're bouncing a basketball, and you're doing the Subway Surfer thing where you're, lane changing to avoid obstacles, jumping on things, sliding under things, and building up a power meter so that when these tiny UFOs come down and attack, you can dunk on them. So you just, for some reason, as you're bouncing the basketball, you could just jump up and dunk the ball into the glass top of the old school Martian UFO, and that's what kills them. It's probably, I don't know, maybe in the fiction that's the only way to stop them is to dunk on the glass dome.
That sounds remarkably like Shut Up and Jam Gaiden is a RPG based on Charles Barkley's Shut Up and Jam, which is a disposable Super NES sports game. So yeah, that's interesting.
Well, you're in pursuit of the Chaos Dunk or something like that in Shut Up and Jam Gaiden.
Yeah.
It's like a post-apocalypse RPG, and only basketball stars can. Maybe I was subconsciously riffing on that. I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's like one of the ways that the influence from these like bizarre internet culture games sort of filters through into the industry.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think that we're about due for that to be a nostalgia play, to be honest with you. I think, is it Hypnospace Outlaw? Is that the
yeah.
I think that's an early peek at an aesthetic that's coming. But
like GeoCities.
Yeah. I honestly think that. I'm not good at predicting this, so I'm probably wrong. But
I think if there is a thing that was popular and predominant, there will be some sort of media that is nostalgic for it in some way. I don't know whether or not it'll become a huge mainstream thing, but it'll definitely exist more.
Did you happen to read a novel that is becoming a movie now called Ready Player One?
I did not happen to read that, and I'm not interested.
Fine, don't read it. But something that's kind of interesting. I read it. Don't recommend it. But something that I thought was kind of interesting was that reading that book, which for the most part is a guy just listing out things from the 80s, is basically the book. But the conceit is that he's in a VR environment where it's basically Second Life but more, and you could just kind of live your life there and have access to all the media ever and whatever. But it made me nostalgic, not for the 80s, because the 80s were garbage, but it made me nostalgic for when I was first discovering that I could pirate things on the internet, which is not it's not a take that I've heard anyone talk about.
Well, that's when you discovered a lot of this media.
Absolutely, yeah. Was like downloading. I mean, not torrents; those didn't exist, but like downloading lots of old stuff and discovering things that way.
I mean, it's interesting to me to think about this because, like back in the day, you go to like a store, like I don't know, like KB Toys or whatever. I mean, this was my first experience getting games was at the very tail end of the NES. Because we happened to get one because our babysitter who lived next door sold us her NES, and it was pretty cheap, but it was like 1993 or something. So they were still like technically making games for the NES, but it was mostly not new games. But anyway, you go there and they have the games in a box. Even at a place like Funko Land later or whatever, you look at the games, especially the new ones, and they'd be like $60 or $70. I had an N64, and because of the costs of like cartridge media and stuff, those games were oftentimes like $70. So you couldn't get most of those games.
Right.
And some of those games were bad or whatever, and maybe not worth the $70, or at least, like not really something that you could have gotten much out of at the time. But like looking back, discovering emulation and stuff, it's all of a sudden those games exist now. They're something that were sort of on the periphery because either you saw them in stores or you read about them in magazines, and you always kind of had some sort of idea about what these games were. Like it was this way for me too in the Apogee PC mail order catalogs, because I had DOS and like I played a lot of like those Apogee shareware games like Duke Nukem and Commander Keen and all that. So you have like, you build up this idea of what these games are, and it really kind of increases your desire to just have a full picture of all the stuff that you were not able to access before. And it seems like that's what feeds a lot of like retro game collecting in particular. I know that like me and my brother, and this was like around 1998, around the same time when we also discovered emulation, and we had a Nintendo, and Nintendo games were cheap and plentiful because they were like, retro games were not cool to collect yet at that point, or at least not to the extent that they are now. So you could find, we found like $2 or $3 games all the time. So we had like, I don't know, like 150 games or whatever. It was mostly my brother, who now does a lot of record collecting and stuff, and like got less interested in Nintendo games. But like that like so much culture was generated by a lot of like that Nintendo stuff in particular. It had such an impact, and there was no way, because of the speed of everything that's coming out, like, and everything, that you could really experience it, because games are even more expensive than going to a movie or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think it, like, if you're somebody who's interested in it, it sort of increases your desire to know everything that you can about all of these things and understand like what was it that drew you into it, because it's a very ephemeral medium, and it's not really something that like it's not really something that there's a lot of like substantial really research or documentation into, and a lot of the stuff that does exist out there isn't particularly great. So yeah, and I think maybe that's part of the interest in the Nintendo in particular is so huge, because of the cultural impact of it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and it's also the sustainability. I had a hard time with that word, of that company and its properties. Like that's not something that's going away. That's the next Disney. Like that's like after Disney, the next one was Nintendo, I think.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I always thought of it that way, even when I was a kid, that Nintendo was like Disney.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you.
For better or for worse, I mean, Nintendo was awful. Nintendo was awful in similar ways that Disney is awful, and they're good in similar ways that Disney is good.
And like when like Miyamoto and companies start dying off, Nintendo's probably going to like be very disappointing to people and go in waves and have renaissances and go back to their roots, and like we're gonna start seeing that stuff after. Like it's gonna have a very Disney trajectory, I'm sure, when their Walt leaves them.
Yeah, like during the 60s or in 70s, people won't be interested, but then they'll have their like like that's the equivalent with Disney. Yeah, that's interesting to think about.
I'm getting way more interested in these topics than my career, so I should just lightning round the rest of it.
Well, I mean, this is part of like, so I mean, but this directly ties into like, like we're talking about Disney, and you worked on the Disney Afternoon Collection. And
sure.
That, like,
actually, yeah, the emulation packages are fun to talk about. We can talk about those.
Yeah, and like the thing with the Disney Afternoon Collection is like these were all games that had their. I mean, these were all sort of IPs or whatever. These were all cultural touchstones that had their own games released out of them, and a lot of them were really good for some reason. But so like it's not just. But like releasing that collection, it's not just about the games, but it's also about the ephemeral sort of identity of this thing, Disney Afternoon, which, for a lot of kids was probably significant or had, a significant place in their lives. So it's not just about the games themselves, but also like the idea of them.
Yeah, like, I mean, yeah, that's the approach that I take with these products, is that I think that just selling someone, a ROM with an emulator and saying, thanks, chump, like that just doesn't work for me. Even as someone who knows these games, I don't, like, I'm not bad-mouthing other companies or anything when I say this, but like when I see a Hamster Arcade Archives release on PlayStation or whatever, I know it's just the game and that's it. And I don't know if that's because I know what MAME is or not, but that's just not valuable to me. I want to attract the harder audience, the kind that knows how to pirate and play these games in a million ways, maybe even owns the cartridges already. And for me, I haven't seen in games the same treatment that classic movies get on disc, where there's behind the scenes featurettes and director's commentary and stuff like that, and it's like, so
your aim with some of this stuff is to go a little bit more in the direction of like the Criterion Collection or something like that.
Yeah, I mean that's I put that in our first press release when we relaunched Digital Eclipse as a brand to do this stuff. Was I don't remember exactly what it was, but I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure of reading a press release, but there's always like a very fake quote from someone in a press release. That usually says "We're excited to" as the first three words. But I think the quote that I wrote for myself said something along the lines of "Video games has been missing something like a Criterion Collection." So yeah, I don't like to make that direct comparison because it's a lot easier with film than it is with games, and I'm never going to hit the mark of Criterion Collection.
I mean, you're one of the only, if not the only, person out there who's interested in trying to do that at all.
Sure, yeah.
A lot of these companies who are releasing, compilations aren't necessarily. It's something that's done very quickly, and like. I think about a lot of those like PS2 arcade game compilations. Like those games are just as easy to play on MAME, if not even easier than they are to play on their like PS2 disc versions.
If not better, not better emulated, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the kind of like in themselves, those things are very ephemeral too. Like
Yeah, and I don't know, for me as a consumer, I'm just not, it doesn't give me any value, but I think that games have just been such a traditional market where we just sell a game that works and that's what people want, that like it's kind of hard to see that they're enough of a cultural cornerstone that there are people who want to feel like they are buying into the celebration of them, you know?
Yeah.
And so what we try to do in these collections is, you know, what would it be like if there was a collector's edition of the NES Mega Man games that went on a bookshelf, you know, with like the art book and the history and all that. And, you know, we try to apply that to games. So Megaman Legacy Collection was the first one. That was Mega Man 1 through 6, the NES games. What we managed to do there was include a lot of art, which is really important for Mega Man, I think, because I mean, you know these games. You had an NES, so like
yeah.
I think what
I know them more through emulator.
Sure, of course, but like you know, you've played games of that era, so of course you've played Mega Man.
Yes.
And I think, you know, whether we realized it at the time or not, I think what made Mega Man stand out was that the presentation of these games is coming from an artist. You know, like it's a very art-driven game.
Yeah, that's true. I noticed that from watching the speedrunners race through Mega Man 2 and 3.
Yeah.
Mega Man 2 in particular, like all of the different stages have completely their own identity, and they might not function that differently from a gameplay perspective sometimes, which is like maybe my criticism of Mega Man games, but like in terms of the setting, it's just completely different, and you have to be looking at it from the perspective of an artist is a really good way to look at a lot of these games in general, because a lot of artists did so much with very, very limited tools.
Yeah. Well, and I mean,
and the music too.
The music, absolutely, yeah. It's like
Mega Man 3's soundtrack is amazing.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear you say 3, because everyone always says 2, and I think 3 is more interesting.
No, 3 is a much but 2 is more interesting stages, and 3 is more interesting music.
I agree, and it sounds so rich. The 3 songs, and
it's very jazzy.
Well, and also like if you look at it in like a visualizer, like if you play the original sound files, you know, on an emulator well, okay, so you probably know the NSF format, right? Which is,
you can open them up, and like so NES games are in this format called NSF, which is basically like there's like 4 tracks, I think.
5. There's 5.
Five tracks, right? And there's actually a program now that you can just open up any of these NSF files and just look at what was inputted into, like, play all the music from there and be able to actually visualize all the music, and you can change it around and do all that stuff.
Yeah.
Really easily now, which is really cool. But yeah, it's basically. It's a lot easier now to make those kind of chip tunes than it was back then, because I think they used machine code and stuff like that. I don't think they had until the Super NES. I think Super NES had a sequencer of some kind, but like the NES I don't think did. So they were working with like very, very limited tools.
Yeah,
and that's one of the interesting things about chip tunes that maybe is lost a little bit when when people think of chiptunes as a thing, like
well, what's lost is that you had to be an engineer to also be a composer.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Which I don't think is necessarily a loss, because okay, so this yesterday, this is a little bit of a tangent, but recently, while I've been working on my laptop, I've been on the TV just putting on like long plays of old video games, because like no one's talking, and it's like someone's in the room playing games. It's nice background. I recommend it. And yesterday I don't know, decided to put on some Amiga games, because what's on the Amiga, I don't really know. And you know, there were like videos going through like the top 50 Amiga games, and I'm looking at all these games, and it's like, man, the humor and the aesthetic and the feel and the design are all from the perspective of I know how to engineer, you know. And it's like, and I think it's not a loss to history that we no longer have to be engineers to make stuff.
Yeah, well, I think there are also cultural differences with some of the Amiga stuff. Like, a lot of like the hardcore Amiga development happened in like the UK and France, and the sensibility was a lot different.
Totally, yeah.
But yeah, no, I do that sometimes as well, and I think it's more interesting to know about the things that are more obscure and like might not even necessarily play that interestingly. But if you're like somebody who's interested in thinking about design and thinking about working within limitations, then it's like absolutely indispensable to look at these sorts of games. Like, I was fascinated by this, like, like the company Colored Dreams is like a company that a lot of people like make fun of, but like there's at least one or two of the games that just have this bizarrely fascinating art in them. There's a game called Pesterminator that we used to own, me and my brother, and like
the only officially licensed game for a real pest extermination company.
Yeah, and like the art in that game is totally bizarre, but kind of really interesting. And it's I don't know, like if you look at it from that perspective, I think you can get a lot out of some of these things. But it's important to like, I don't know. I don't feel like games culture oftentimes has a good perspective on these things because, people expect a certain sort of playability or approachability to some of these games that just is not inherently there. But they're interesting in different ways from like a cultural context and stuff. I'm not sure how interesting they are to people who didn't like grow up with them or not, but I think like they can be sort of contextualized in an interesting way, just in the same way that like Star Wars is, like an old serialized film or comic book, except made more modern to its era. Or Indiana Jones. Like, I'm sure that there will be, reimaginings of some of this, like, more or less disposable considered art that, come back at some point. But yeah, I don't know. What was I going to say? So yeah, you worked on, and so your main interest with
these collections, with Mega Man, with Disney Afternoon, with Street Fighter, my main interest, and this is not me speaking for the company, it's me. My main interest is making a product where you can feel satisfied with the product and your purchase, just playing with the extra features, and that the games being playable is almost like the secondary feature of these things. Like they're more like. I think of these products, the ideal products. We haven't always hit the mark, but I think of our ideal vision for these products as being the equivalent of a hardcover art book for these games that happens to be in digital form and turnable with a game controller, and with the benefits of being a video game, like being able to just jump into a boss fight when you feel like it instead of having to actually get there, or being able to like watch people speed run through segments of the game and stuff like that. So Mega Man was very focused on the art. Like we said, it was very art-centric sort of game. And also I had the benefit of working on a franchise where they had published a giant art book. So I had access to that art. So that was easy. It wasn't easy. It took forever, but you know what I mean. But then with Disney, that was a little bit different because it was someone else's IP, and there wasn't a lot of like video game concept art made for Disney. So Capcom didn't have a lot of material from making these games. But what they did have, I don't know why they held on to this, but I'm glad they did, was all of the stuff that Disney like faxed over to them back in the day, they still had. And I don't mean like correspondence and build notes and stuff like that. I mean that the producer at Disney would send over like model sheets from DuckTales or like or like storyboards from episodes and things like that. So like even if you didn't have access to watching the episodes, like what the characters look like, in general how they move and things like that. And so the bonus features that we created for Disney Afternoon Collection were more along those lines of showing how Capcom worked with the source material and showing side by side how like the bulldogs from the mechanical bulldogs in the first level
Chip and Dale.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
you remember them very well. I was able to show side by side how those were based on characters that were created for the episode Catteries Not Included of Chip and Dale's Rescue Rangers. And I was able to show the model sheets that the animators drew from, which had the bulldog in the exact two poses that the sprites are in. So, like, I was able to show that, like, the Capcom artist literally just drew this model sheet in pixel form, and that's where that character design came from. And, like, that, a lot of the features were more based on that, or, like, miscellaneous, like, promotional things that we dug up, like we found on YouTube. Like, we found. I searched in YouTube and discovered, the commercials that they did for DuckTales and Rescue Rangers, and showed. It's funny. I was able to show screenshots of the commercials, but not if they showed someone's face, because we didn't have legal clearance for that. So if you go look at the slide where I have stills of those commercials, it's just like every shot that didn't have a kid's face. But yeah, that's what we focus on for Disney. And then and I really like the way that turned out. And then for Street Fighter, I can't talk about it too much, but they showed some stuff in the trailers. And what we focused on for Street Fighter was the history of this franchise, because it's very old now, and it's more of like digging up the concept work that was published and sort of piecing together like the sort of making of Street Fighter 2. Based on multiple sources and interviews throughout the years, which I'm very excited for people to see. I know that sounds like, me being a jerk off, like shilling a product, but I'm proud of my work.
Well, I mean, it has uses beyond you just selling. Like, you're doing research and stuff that has uses beyond just you selling your product.
Oh, yeah. Well, and also, we don't even get a cut of these games, so, like, it's not really me selling these products.
I see.
It's all work for hire, but...
Oh, okay, that makes sense. I think the interesting thing with the Disney Afternoon Collection in particular is it's correct to say that those games were not released on digital download or something. They had not been...
Yeah, ever.
Yeah, they had not been released after their initial, like, release, right?
Yeah, between 89 and 93, and then that was it.
Yeah, well, and like, and a game like DuckTales 2, I know is also very rare and hard to find, and so the only way that you'd be playing a lot of these games, and sometimes these games are kind of expensive too.
Yeah.
Even when they're not rare, so maybe the only way that you'd be playing these is through emulation. So so this is like the first time that you can actually buy these games commercially. That's not like a remake or something, because I know that DuckTales had a remake, but that's its own thing.
You want to hear a fun story about
Disney
Afternoon? So do you recognize the branding Disney Afternoon?
Yeah, I mean, I remember when it was on TV.
Yeah, so it was a programming block of Disney cartoons that ran, I think, weekday afternoons.
What channel was it on? Was it like ABC or?
I believe it was syndicated.
Syndicated. Okay.
So like any local affiliate could buy that syndication package and air the Disney Afternoon, I believe.
And this was in like the early 90s, right?
It was that time, right? It was like 88 to like 95, if I had to guess. And all of the games in this collection are based on shows that were part of the Disney Afternoon block. So it was kind of a nostalgia play. When we first started the project, the lineup of games was a little bit different. And one of them, I'm not going to say which one, that obviously should have been in the product wasn't in the lineup that they wanted, and was replaced by a different Disney game that was not part of the Disney Afternoon. And so I wanted the other game in my damn product. You know? And so I was like, well, I asked, could you clear with Disney? Can we call this the Disney Afternoon? Because I think it's a good nostalgia play. I think it fits most of these games. But my secret hope was that Disney would then review the game and be like, well, where's X? The game I don't want to mention, because that was part of the Disney Afternoon that should be in here. Anyway, my secret plan worked.
Oh, so the game did actually
the game that I wanted to get in the collection got in because Disney said, wait, this is the Disney Afternoon. Where's that one? So,
nice.
I just wanted to share my trickery somewhere, much like that. I got my way. But yeah, and I think that the idea is that I don't think playing these games in a vacuum does much, and that contextualizing their history and understanding where they came from and how they were sold, and how people played them. Like, I think that is how you interact with a game, in the same way that, like, have you seen Citizen Kane? Have you ever seen that movie?
Yes, I've seen. Yeah, I've seen it many times.
Yeah, me too. I love that movie. But the first time I saw it, was with no context. It was just, here's Citizen Kane. It's a movie that's classic, that people love, and I had a good time. It's a really good movie on its own. But when I learned about its history, when I learned
Did you read that Pauline Kael article, the one about it's called Raising Cain?
Where was it?
That talks. Oh, it was a long time ago. You can find it online.
Okay.
It talks about it's disputed how much, how it talks about the principal screenwriter of Citizen Kane, and he used to hang out a lot with William Randolph Hearst's mistress. So it talks about that. I think it's like a little bit, it's not 100% factually accurate, but it's a really interesting article nonetheless. And of course, like, I mean, like, Orson Welles and his life is always like super fascinating to me.
Totally, so. Yeah. Oh man, I really want to see his cut of Ambersons. My God, you seen Magnificent Ambersons?
I've never seen that one.
Okay.
I've seen like some. He had a movie that was recut a billion times that Criterion released a version of called Mr. Arkadin.
Oh yeah, man! Like all three cuts are in the collection.
Yeah,
because none of them are definitive at all. Yeah.
Yeah, they just kind of had to guess and do their best job with it.
Well, like their cut is very good, I thought.
Yeah. But then there are different footage with different qualities,
right? Because it's like the last surviving Wells cut, and then like the theater cut, and then the Criterion cut, I think, where they tried to bring it back to a Wellesian vision.
Yeah.
But
anyway, yeah.
Oh, I was going to say Ambersons really quick is I don't know that it's a good movie, but once you read about the scenes that were cut and the original vision, it like becomes a good movie. And all of that footage is lost, and there's some fascinating articles because that's like the holy grail of film history is the Wells cut of Magnificent Ambersons.
Because he did it right after Citizen Kane,
right.
too. I think that's part of it. Because he had later movies that are also good. I mean, a lot of people say that Touch of Evil is as good as any of his other movies, but
that's all right. Yeah.
I think it's different. It's very different.
Yeah.
But
the reason, sorry, we rambled on Citizen Kane, but the reason I bring that up as an analogy is like the Citizen Kane of video games. The movie is good and entertaining on its own, but when you learn about the history and you learn who William Randolph Hearst was, and you learn about his antagonistic relationship with Wells, and how Wells was this this kid who just got this sweetheart deal of a contract that was unheard of.
He was a boy genius.
Yeah.
He's like the Mark Zuckerberg or something.
Right. And when you learn that this film is like a total takedown of this media mogul, and when you learn about who that person actually was, then you start to sort of see not only the parody of it, but it like kind of becomes a little bit sadder and more profound, I think, also. And really all you need to do is like if you can rent the Blu-ray or the DVD, just watch the featurette that came with it, and it just completely contextualizes that movie. And it makes that movie a very different movie. And I think games are worthy of that. Like, I think Super Mario Brothers in a vacuum is a fun game, but I think if you understand Super Mario Brothers in its time and place, you understand how revolutionary it was that, like, you could go under the screen, you know, that the sky was blue and things scrolled. Like, that was kind of new.
Well, so I think this what we're talking about also explains a lot of the popularity of, first of all, like video game YouTubers, retro game YouTubers in particular. There are a lot of like retro gaming and gaming festivals, things like MagFest and things like that. A lot of these things have grown immensely, I think, because people just want to have some feeling of this like shared culture, because these things are such a large part of maybe what they grew up with, or maybe they experienced it, you know, on the side, but they never grew up with these things, but always wanted to own them.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's an interesting side of that there's this whole culture that isn't really, it doesn't really exist in the same way in the public eye as like some other kinds of subcultures do. And when it does, it's kind of like looked down upon or made fun of, or you know, whatever, seen as very childish. And maybe it is in some ways, but it isn't in another way, you know. And I think people are just really interested to know, including like new generations of people really interested to know what the stuff is, and you know the context of it. Unfortunately, like a lot of the information out there is not very good or not very comprehensive, and I feel like a lot of the like retro game reviewers and people who do YouTube, there's like not a lot of substance there, because I mean they don't do lots of research, and they don't do their own like, and even when there is research, they don't do like a lot of their own research. You can find it elsewhere. It's really like a primer at best, but like I think there's a lot more potential for really interesting explorations of this culture, and I'm personally fascinated a lot more in not just some of the kinds of games that you talk about that were never released, like something like Bioforce Ape, but also like you know, games that were not necessarily good or well remembered, but maybe have some interesting things about them that make them like worth kind of exploring and thinking about, because the history moves so fast, and there's no like, I mean, this is one thing with your video game history
foundation,
thank you, is that there's no like and the Video Game Preservation Society in Japan, which you briefly mentioned earlier, is that both of these there's no public funding for this stuff. There's no like public interest in this stuff. It's all like private collectors. There aren't really like corporations even in games who have particularly interest in preserving this stuff, because it's not like profitable to them. So it's really on collectors and people who've grown up with this stuff to take on all of the work themselves. And I think even like a lot of game collectors, the reason why maybe they get into it is just because they feel like they want their own sort of sense of preservation of some of this stuff, because the idea that some of this stuff could just be out there like sitting in a waste bin somewhere is upsetting, you know.
Well, or not even sitting in a waste bin, but like spread to the winds, you know.
Yeah, like smashed into pieces and
well, I don't mean literally smashed into pieces.
Oh, you mean like doesn't exist anymore?
Well,
like,
no. I mean doesn't exist in one place.
Yeah. Okay.
You know what I mean? Like the idea of there not being a curated like collection of material, but a lot of private individuals owning important pieces that it might sell off without you ever knowing, and then who knows where it is, sort of thing.
Yeah, the context is missing, and I think one problem that from following some of that retro game stuff is that the price inflation has gotten quite insane, and certain things become their own sort of symbols of like how good a collector is if they own, you know, X or Y, and it takes away focus from like the actual talking about the actual game and the context behind it.
Yeah.
And that is one problem. I
Yeah.
think with a lot of this, like these kinds of subcultures in general, but
I think we've talked about this before, that like the collecting mentality has sort of dominated the way we talk about old games.
Yeah.
And that's really unfortunate, because that's, I don't know, that's like
it's competitive too, instead of like sharing information. People are like hoarding things, you know, they're hoarding their copy of stadium events or whatever.
Which is, I mean, like you say hoarding, which is, you know, sounds derogatory. I don't know if you necessarily mean it that way, but like that's where museum collections come from, you know, is people hoarding things and then getting them to a museum. So it's actually, in the grand scheme of things, video games becoming collectible is kind of a good thing, because it's putting these things in the care of people who, you know, care for them. It's not, you know, there's good and bad with that, obviously. Because
I'm more like talking about the sort of competitive collector mindset,
right?
Rather than, and I think that's just like the nature of our culture and game culture, and the way that people approach it just by default is that. But I
don't understand why. Like I actually used to collect video games way early on, and I still do have like a small, you know, bookshelf curated collection of stuff that I like. So I sort of get that mentality, but like, I don't know, the older I get, and I don't know if it's just the times, I don't know if it's because I can access the world's knowledge in my pocket whenever I feel like it. I don't know, but I feel like most people who collect anything are trying to sort of like hold on to the past in some way, right? And I understand the draw of nostalgia, but what I don't understand is how much longer can nostalgia be a driving force behind anyone's actions when like nothing is lost anymore, you know, like anything you grew up with is very easily accessible now. So like I don't understand how much longer.
I wouldn't say anything, but most things.
Sure. Yeah, I can't find some commercials that I saw when I was a kid, you know, but like for the most part, you know, any episode of most shows that I watch, some things are lost.
It is weird. It is weird when you rediscover some of that. I remember, like, I grew up watching Nickelodeon. I remember, like, watching Rocko's Modern Life, because that was my favorite show when I was a kid. I remember watching it recently and being, like, weirdly, this, like, really eerie, familiar feeling, like I remember, I, like, internalized parts of that show in ways that I didn't even remember. But it's almost weird to watch it again, and it feels like you should be able to. Maybe people want to access some of the emotions and feelings that they had back then that maybe they still can't 100% access.
Yeah.
And it's about trying to get back to that sort of state of mind, which is like both just like part of the human condition and also kind of sad.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it is like being able to fulfill the dream that you had as a kid.
Yeah.
Like
that's true.
I just started watching Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee on Netflix. Do you know the premise of the show?
No.
So it's something that Jerry Seinfeld does, and it's every episode he introduces a car that they're borrowing for the shoot. It's usually some vintage awesome car. And then he goes and picks up a comedian acquaintance of his in that car, and they talk about whatever, and they get coffee and talk about whatever, and then he drops him back home, and that's the whole show. But I bring it up just because a lot of the times when they're talking about these cars, it's like from the perspective of when I was growing up, I used to see this car and I really wanted one, and then I got one, and it's like, I don't know, it's I understand that driver, I guess, but like I feel that I've also mostly conquered that feeling, and I feel better for it.
I think you've dove in a little bit to trying to. I think it's really important to try and understand these things from a broad perspective. Like, I mean, one thing that might explain why so many people have a particular attachment with Nintendo is just, and Japanese games in general, is just that there are cultural differences that maybe they don't quite understand.
Yeah.
And that's not something that I quite understand either, but I know that, like, there are things that go into these games that might be inherently obvious for someone from Japan that are not going to be obvious to a US audience, and vice versa. And like, I think it's really important to talk about that kind of stuff, and it's something that makes me sad that, like, there are a lot of people who are experts, quote unquote, on games, and Japanese games in particular, but know like nothing about Japanese culture and society. And it just seems like a pretty important facet of that.
Yeah.
And I don't know, in that documentary I'll probably link it in the description, about the Video Game Preservation Society in Japan, which is run by a French guy. And then,
Joseph Redon.
Yeah. And they do a lot of different things. They have I really liked their whole like game recorder function, where they like, not only are they trying to preserve the physical games and make sure that they're still able to be played, but also of many different formats, particularly like older computer games in Japan. In the same way in Europe and other places, oftentimes they were very limited release, and a lot of those games might not necessarily exist anymore, or if they do, there's a very small number of copies and a very limited number of people who are interested in them. But so not only do they do that, but they also record someone playing the game so that like through like a player inside the cartridge, or inside I don't know exactly how they do, but like so that people know how to actually play these games, because that's part of that's part of the understanding of games. And then magazines as well is part of like preserving and understanding and all those are aspects, and commercials. All of those are aspects of the culture and ways of like understanding and having some sort of view into it. But one thing that that guy Joseph said in particular was that a lot of these Japanese games are very different and very strange, and to Westernize, and that's something that is good, that should be preserved and that should be understood. That, and like, there's always going to be that like cultural difference between different sort of cultures that are making and producing these games. And I think it's good that like when we can be in dialogue with these things, but I think it's important to understand also the context and what like leads to this sort of different sensibility, and to really get to because that might help get to the core of like understanding why so many people respond to these things the way that they do. And I feel like a lot of the commentary around games doesn't really actually get to the heart of what is interesting or nostalgic to people about games.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it sort of speaks to your point of a lot of the discussion around old games not being very substantive. That like YouTubers or whatever, kind of talk about them on a very surface level, and research-wise are only basically citing Wikipedia. And I think that's related in a lot of ways. And, my nonprofit, the Video Game History Foundation, a big motivator of mine, honestly, is to make that content better. Not the content, like, I don't want to make the content. I want to make other people's content better. Because we're not talking about old games in ways that's all that interesting to me. So like there's a little bit of a motive there that's personal. But I honestly don't think that it's a problem with the people who make the content. And I don't think it's a problem with the people even writing the Wikipedia articles that the content is citing from. I think the problem is just a lack of access to this material. And
well, a lot of the information is locked away through various sources. Like we don't have oftentimes a lot of access to people who actually worked on these things,
right?
Or access to the materials are not well preserved, and there's a lot of elements maybe they can't even still talk about, or don't want to talk about, or it's hard to track down people and get sort of the context behind a lot of these things.
Right. And the next best thing is to just give people access to like material that exists already, that has some notion of that. Like, there's probably, I don't know. We're talking about the NES earlier. A lot of those. There's a lot of interesting games that came out only on the Famicom in Japan. How many Famicom manuals are scanned? Like 20? There's just not that many. And it's just something as simple as that, as like access to the thing that came in the package that's very difficult. I was recently playing the first Mother game, the NES
one. I was going to mention that because that was my first experience doing emulation with something that was a prototype.
Oh, was Earthbound.
With Earthbound Zero.
Yeah.
Because that was, a translated version of Mother 1, but that was finished, that was never released in the US for whatever reason.
Right. And it's so many people don't understand that the version on the Wii U is this old prototype. I think there's this weird misunderstanding that like Nintendo went back and localized Mother. I see that all the time. It drives me crazy, and it just makes people continue believing that Mother 3 is coming. But anyway, the total tangent. But like, I was recently playing Mother, and I was looking up, trying to find pictures of the manual and the guidebook and stuff. And if you see, the limited pictures that are out there of like the material that you would have had access to if you were in Japan when the game came out at the time, it really fleshes that game out a lot. Because, I mean, first of all, there's like clay models of all the characters, which is really cute. But, like, there is actually a map that you were supposed to have, of what the world looked like. That if you played it at the time and gotten the guide, you would have had the official map. And if you try to play it now, it's actually easy to get lost. But if you were a player in Japan at the time and you were into it, like there was a map. You can't get that online even now for a series
even
like Mother.
Even Zelda
right.
1 came with a map, and it came with hints on how to get to the first several dungeons, and then afterwards it said sort of like you're on your own. But that's how I was able to get through at least the first part of enough of the game to be like, oh, okay, this is interesting, even though I never got much further in it.
Yeah, it teaches you how to play the game by showing you exactly what you're supposed to do. And I mean, that's just an example of like, Earthbound, that series, like those are very extreme fans. You know what I mean? Like there is a community, a very healthy community of fans of that franchise. And
I'm still sad I never did my Earthbound. I was going to do an Earthbound arrangement album of the music.
Oh man!
And when I was in high school, and I got like, I made a few tracks, and there were a few tracks floating around on the internet that were supposed to be for that by other people, but it never got finished. And there was another project that was released called Bound Together, but mine was going to be better. No, that's still like, actually that's still a sensitive subject with the person who did Bound Together, so I shouldn't. He probably won't listen to this podcast, but.
But my only real point there was that, like, you know, even for a series like that, you can't go on the internet and find that manual. You know, you can't go to like WorldCat and find it in a library even. You know, and it's and that's just the manual for the game so that you know what you were supposed to know when you played it. You know.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, it's basic information. I mean, that's true of a lot of old computer games like C64 and Amiga games in particular. Like C64 games had heavy documentation, and trying to pick them up and play them through an emulator is oftentimes weird and unwieldy and difficult, partly because the manuals and that stuff are not always easy to find.
Totally, yeah. And, you know, like, manuals is one of many kinds of like artifacts that we deal with, but it's really our place in this world, the Video Game History Foundation, because there's a lot of institutions that deal in video game history in their ways. You know, there's a lot of, not a lot, but, you know, there are physical archives of games. There are, you know, there are digital archives of games. There's the Internet Archive. But what there's not a lot of is recognizing those pieces that could be valuable to researchers that are endangered and actively collecting them, and finding a way for people to access them. And that's kind of where we fit into the grander story, I guess. And so what we focus on mostly, you mentioned magazines. I mean, you probably know I have a giant video game magazine collection. Mm-hmm. That, you know, is my private collection that is now the Foundation's collection. And those magazines, you know, give you a lot of context in terms of what people, or at least video game critics, you know, thought about a game at the time.
There's a lot of cultural information about games at the time that you can get from magazines.
Absolutely, yeah.
Also, like, advertisements and like magazines like Nintendo Power, or I remember one called, I mean, there was EGM, but then there was EGM2, and EGM2 had a bunch of maps in it, like you know, actual walkthroughs and stuff of the game, which sometimes those games have strategy guides or whatever, but sometimes they don't. So that's another valuable, like, yeah.
Well, like, I'll give you a really good like context discovery through magazines, since we were talking about Earthbound. So it's pretty well known that Earthbound, you know, Mother 2 in America didn't sell very well. Wasn't a hit for Nintendo, which is, you know, probably why 3 never happened here. And a lot of people, you know, they might blame the marketing, because the marketing, as you may recall, was literally, this game stinks. I don't think the marketing was that bad, but anyway, it's beside the point.
Well, I think the sensibility of the game appeals a lot more to contemporary audiences than it might have to audiences at the time who are starting to get into 3D and like, you know, didn't like that. Yeah,
exactly. And that's what you discover if you pull out all these magazines and read all of the critical reviews of Earthbound. And what you find is that almost everyone thinks that the graphics are bad at worst or childish at best. You know, we now...
which is now not the contemporary opinion about that game.
Right, absolutely.
Most people think that the game's visuals aged actually much better than a lot of other games at the time. Especially Donkey Kong Country. Like, if you compare games that were released in the same year...
Yeah, and if you think about the environment that Earthbound was released in, like, it was at E3. I was at the first E3 in '95, and Nintendo's booth for E3 was it was Star Fox 2, Comanche, and FX Fighter, all three of which were polygonal 3D games for their Super Nintendo, for the Super FX chip. By the way, none of those games came out. Like, all 3 of them got canned. But, like, the point is...
Star Fox 2 technically
came out on a different platform, sure. But, you know, it was like those 3 games and like trying to go to the future with 3D. And, like, you know, the booth next door was PlayStation. And then, like, tucked away in the corner was Earthbound, which is the sort of throwback RPG. I don't know. And, like, you look at it in that environment, and it's like, well, who could have sold Earthbound? You know, in the year that PlayStation's coming out, how are you going to sell Earthbound to Americans? It's impossible. So, you know, the answer to why didn't it sell is because, like, it couldn't have possibly.
Well, Earthbound is a good kind of thing to focus on as an example of a game that you know, had difficulty getting out to a lot of people, was really interesting, almost as much, if not more, as a piece of, like, as a cultural document or as a piece of, like, cultural commentary that happened to take the form of a video game.
Yeah.
And its reputation has grown because of that. But it's a good example of, like, a kind of, like, historically misunderstood game, that is actually really insightful and has a lot of interesting things that most games do not have, and most people understand that about Earthbound now, but I think maybe only because it was released by Nintendo on the Super NES, like,
absolutely,
and that makes me wonder, like, I think part of what makes me interested in going back and looking at some of these older games is, like, are there other games like that, you know, that are not, you know, well respected or whatever, because partly just they were not released at the right time, or they just didn't have the right sort of sensibility for the time.
Yeah.
But now we can go back and see them as being really interesting and totally kind of ahead of their time. And, like, there has been some, like, you know, there are some games that have that reputation now, but that's still something that I'm very interested in doing, and that's still something that is, like, you know, needs to happen more.
Absolutely.
Like, people need to go back and look. Like, here's an example of, like, I mean, we're talking on Twitter about the NES game Die Hard. As, like, it's not, like, a perfect game, but, like, there are a lot of really interesting, like, systems in that game, that are pretty atypical. And
it has a foot meter.
Yeah. And, like, that kind of stuff is, you know, like, if you view it through the context of, like, I don't want to blame, like, the angry video game nerd for everything, because I think, like, his sort of focus and his channel was basically kind of channeling the sort of rage or upset feelings that you had as a kid when you played these games and they were not what you expected.
Right.
But, like, we also need to look at it through the perspective as, like, being adults now and, like, understanding the context and understanding that things don't have to be immediately playable or comprehensible. And then, you know, what kind of works are there that are interesting that we can, you know, that have been ignored and stuff. And I guess that's the aspect of, like, preservation that I like, not necessarily, like, preserving things physically, but, like, also bringing to light, you know, things that deserve to have more attention and focus on them than do now. And that's something that still very much needs to happen, because the video games are very, like, young medium.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why at our you were at GDC when we had a booth, right? Did I see you?
I saw you at the Portland Retro Game.
Okay, you didn't go to GDC. Okay, so we had
No, I did go to GDC, but I don't think I saw the booth at GDC.
Okay, that's fine. But so we are in this new section that GDC does called Retro Play, and it's
I think I know.
Yeah, it's just started last year, and it was like, you know, they're like, they give table space to anyone who wants to display older games.
This is the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco, by the way.
Yes, thank you.
We're talking about.
Thank you. so we were invited to have a table, and so what I displayed was like I didn't want to just be like, here's come play Super Mario. It's like that's whatever. But like we're GDC, I want to inspire, but I also want to tell our story at the same time. So it was kind of a mixture of unreleased or super rare things that only exist because of preservation efforts that I also find interesting. One of them was Penn and Teller's Smoke and Mirrors, which I think has a lot of really interesting design ideas. I think Desert Bus is like a funny video game, which is hard to do. So I had that, and I had Where in North Dakota as Carmen Sandiego, because that's just funny.
Oh yeah, that was the Carmen Sandiego game that was commissioned by the government of North Dakota, right?
Yeah. So it was the Educational Department of North Dakota. Like we actually have an article coming out pretty soon on our website, which by the way is gamehistory.org. I will pump that right now. Push. But yeah, because I actually went to North Dakota to recover this game. And to interview the teachers who worked on it and stuff. But it was Carmen Sandiego's had like 2 games at this point. It was Where in the World and Where in the USA. And the story was that, basically teachers were like, hey, this is a good teaching tool. We teach the state of North Dakota in, I think, like 3rd and 6th grade. And there's like half a book that exists on North Dakota, but kids really are learning about geography with these games. Wouldn't it be cool if we could work with these guys and make a Carmen Sandiego game to teach the state? And so they, wrote a letter to Broderbund, and they were at a weird point where they didn't know what they were doing with Carmen Sandiego yet, because it was just starting to explode, but also it was kind of 3 things from the interviews I've done. It was like they didn't know what to do with Carmen. They were starting to see a lot of money from education, because Carmen was not an education product when they sold it, but teachers used it so much that they like made a teacher's guide and sort of made an educational version. So like that was going really well for them. And also they were experimenting with the idea of can we make our games into formulas that you just drop data in? Can we like make a Carmen maker, that we can just drop data in and boom, there's a new Carmen game. And so they agreed to this weird idea of Where in North Dakota is Carmen Sandiego. And long story short, they made it and lost money on the thing, and it went a year over schedule and stuff. But like the end of it was that there's this weird artifact that only existed in North Dakota classrooms that's like the lost entry in one of the most popular video game franchises ever. So
that's I want to pause on that for a second, because I think that's actually really interesting to me, thinking about, well, like I've talked to people who don't know anything about video games who played Oregon Trail or something similar growing up. Like that was a game that got everywhere because like a lot of classes had computer labs, and they had that game on it, and maybe like Carmen Sandiego or maybe one of the Sim games. And it makes me think of like, for someone like I'm interested, I kind of come from the perspective of I'm like left-wing socialist kind of perspective, and I'm always interested in the idea of like, what could how could public funding be allocated for some of this stuff, and that is actually like because people kids do respond so much to this work, and if there was public money going into some of this stuff to make actually interesting content, to actually make something kind of like Minecraft, it would be interesting to see like I think that's something that hasn't really been explored very much, but
is public funding into, well, there's been public
directed into game development for specific educational purposes, which happens a little bit, but like, you know, if there was more money going towards that, then maybe there would be more interesting games being made in that sphere.
Yeah.
And also going into like stuff that you do, like games preservation and stuff like that. I mean, like, we're a long way away from that in the future, but it's something to like think about as like, you know, especially if we end up moving more towards having like a social welfare state or something like that in the future. Like, how would that involve video games? I don't know. It's something to think about.
Every time you talk, there's like 5 conversations I want to have, and I have to stop myself.
Well, I wanted to mention that because I have talked about, you know, I have talked to some like kind of I've had more explicitly political episodes of this podcast where we talk about some of that kind of stuff. But was there something you wanted to say about that though? Because I feel like you might have something interesting to say about it.
Well, God, you brought up a lot of interesting points. I think that, you know, there have been educational games, obviously, and there's been public funding put into game development, but I think that I don't think there's ever been a real budget like associated with that to like actually try things, and I feel like a lot of the publicly funded games just kids know video games, you know what I mean? They're not stupid. And so if it's not,
you have to make a good video game.
Exactly. And then I haven't seen that happen yet, but also I don't really follow them that much, you know, but like I used to follow sort of the business of educational game development as a journalist, but I wasn't like playing every educational game. But I suspect that the problem is that it's pretty hard to make a good video game. And
yeah, well, I'm thinking about.
Oh, and does it have to be educational, or can it just be like serious? You know, like a serious game.
Yeah, I mean, it could be either. I'm thinking about like one thing that could be done is like there could be public money invested into particular game spaces. Like, you know, in LA, there's a space called Glitch City, which is pretty small, and it's more of a workspace. Oakland has the Maid, but those are all like, that's like privately owned. Those are privately owned and like, you know, have a very limited scope of things that they do. So it would be interesting if there was public money invested in that. Maybe that's a hub for kids to get into game development, and then maybe that's a way for kids to actually start, you know, getting money for their games, or making a career off of that, is having some distribution services that are through some sort of public sphere. Anyway, I'm just thinking out loud about this stuff, but I think it's like games are so inherently like sort of very individualistic, capitalistic, commercial, and I think that fights against a lot of the efforts that need to happen when we talk about something like game preservation, because then the efforts fall on individuals to do it, and there inevitably usually isn't enough money to really do what is required.
I think that's true of, you know, most, you know, nonprofit ventures, really.
Oh, totally. But it's I mean, it's worth thinking about it. It's worth having that conversation in video games, because I know there's a lot of like hypersensitivity to having a political conversation in video games. But
not here, not in this space.
No, but like, you know, in general, in the cultural game space, like, but I think you don't have to think about it in the way of like, you know, the government having an agenda that they're trying to push through games and ruin. Because I think people think about educational games as inherently boring, or, you know, because they usually are. So I wonder if there's another way to think about this stuff that actually sort of helps foster this culture that people are experiencing via YouTube, or via going to these game spaces, or going to events like MagFest, and to have some sort of investment into that like infrastructure so that that culture is something that people can actually share and enjoy without, you know, while still letting them, you know, still letting these spaces operate within their own guidelines or their own like ideals or whatever. I think that is achievable. I think that's something that has been done in other countries with like, you know, like music or art spaces. So
yeah.
I don't see why it couldn't be done with game spaces either. But anyway.
So not so much funding the creation of a game that teaches a concept, but funding the notion of enrichment through video games?
Well, both,
okay.
really. I mean, but like especially, I think like the big problem that I've run into with video games is that the only time that people can see each other and really talk to each other about the issues that they're facing and dealing with is they can only either talk about it through the internet and through mediums like we're talking right now, or through going to an event like GDC, which is prohibitively expensive.
Yeah.
Even like an event like MagFest, which is, you know, less expensive but hugely crowded and sells out instantaneously.
And very culturally specific, I would say.
And very culturally specific. And so having like more of these like local spaces where people can actually meet and do this on a more consistent basis and like do the necessary work to you know, really do justice to the works that people are making and have made. I mean, if we want to get into this too, this is a thing that I worry about, especially when we're talking about game preservation. It's the thing I worry about, especially with games that have come out, I don't know, even in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Even before that, when we're talking about Flash, like Flash technically doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
I'm sure there will be some way to play Flash games through some medium, but it's not supported anymore. Like there was that article that I mentioned to you before we were recording about how like 80% of the games that Eurogamer listed as their best iPhone or iPad games.
It was Edge, by the way.
Edge. Okay, sorry. Don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
You can't play them because of formats and Apple's not interested in supporting and making a decent development environment, and developers don't have the resources to really update the things. This happened with Unity too. Like
Yeah.
Unity also updated versions. It used to have a web player, and now games that were made to work within that don't run anymore. And these are games that are like 5 years old, maybe 10 years old at most. And I'm thinking about that in the context of there's so many games coming out lately the last few years on Steam and stuff because of the ease of access to tools and digital distribution and all that kind of stuff. And what's going to happen to all these games too, because like so few people are buying and talking about a lot of these games. There's so much work that's invested in that. And that's where preservation comes in. And that's where like having also a culture that's interested in talking about these things, not just when they're current, but is interested in kind of preserving these stories, preserving what's interesting about these games, preserving them digitally and physically is really, really important. And that's where like some sort of public funding or something could come in, because I just don't see how it's going to happen with the way that the marketplace is now.
And when you say it happened, do you mean funding the preservation of video game history, or are you still talking about sort of a development space?
Well, I'm talking about more like preserving the history.
Okay, yeah.
And like making sure that these things don't disappear, and making sure that they that like people are still interested in talking about them.
So I'm still very new at the nonprofit thing. I am not a person who should run a business, but I am. And my understanding is that even in the most ideal scenario, or like even in the most ideal like financial reality of the economy, that where funding comes from is from rich people who care. And so, you know, that's kind of to be honest with you, our strategy is to start talking to rich people who care and figure out how to get that ball rolling and how to attract other rich people who care into like snowballing thing,
as a way to exist. That is how you do
right.
it. I just wonder, like there could
but
be
you
a
want
rich
like
person
arts funding, right?
Yeah, but there could be a rich person who cares about a very specific thing, and so that thing is well preserved. But it's like the problem is the problem with depending on that sort of funding in general is that it's very spotty.
Yeah.
It's very it depends on the whims of whoever is doing it, and I mean,
and they might donate $1 million to us, but specify in that donation that it is for the preservation of N-Gage software, and then we have to spend that $1 million specifically on that.
And so N-Gage is well preserved,
right.
Whereas, and so that's the thing. That's the thing that,
and that can get very political.
Yeah, and so that's the. I wonder how we. And I'm not saying it has to be. I'm not trying to specify exactly how it has to exist, but I think that kind of environment where that we can have some sort of shared way to talk about this sort of like culture and share it with each other and like not forget about some of these things from the past and share information so that we can actually better understand the environment that these things were made in and like be able to rediscover and know what people have gone through in history so that we don't make the same mistakes so that some people don't, because I don't know, just information is lost so often with video game sphere. Like, I mean, people have said this a lot, but as a critic, like, things that I talked about with other people on the blogosphere, like, people will rediscover and talk about 5 years later, and maybe those people have not read any of the discussion that happened before because they're not in that sphere. And that's like where sharing information and that kind of stuff becomes really crucial.
Well, and also, I mean, the modern internet is against us, I feel, it's like discovering those conversations is, I don't know, it's impossible now.
It's weird because there's so much based around video games and the internet. Like, video games are very tied into the internet in ways that no other medium, like artistic medium,
Absolutely, yeah.
But like it's only good for preserving certain things, and it works against this kind of discussion and this
right.
kind of...
Like, something I hear pretty often is actually video games are very well preserved. And first of all, I agree that actually the things that we consider important, we've done a pretty good job of saving in some way. But I would also argue that like that tremendous representation of video games in the digital world is indicative of a much larger world that is not being preserved. And so, that's why we're having this conversation ultimately, is like, okay, yeah, I can download every NES game ever, but I can't, we don't know anything about any of them.
Yeah, you don't have the context. Yeah. And I mean, that's really important. And like, also, it's easy for things to get lost. Like, I can play and access so many different games on Steam now that have come out in the last 2 years, but it doesn't mean that I have any knowledge of what is actually good and interesting and culturally significant, or what has an interesting story behind it, or, what could be valuable at all from just playing it. And I probably won't get that context from playing it. And that's why like being able to share information and that stuff is really, really useful.
Yeah.
And like in spheres that are built around sort of commentary about the most popular thing, kind of inevitably goes to the top and becomes the most visible because that's the thing that the most people view. Then we don't get to, then it's not easy to find if that information is even out there. If it is out there and there's not a lot of incentive for people to put that information out there when they feel like it's just going to disappear, or not many people are going to notice it, or it's not going to have an impact.
Yeah, I mean, this feels kind of weird to say, but I think people should start making books again. I just don't trust the internet the way I used to retain information.
I mean, that's part of the reason why I published this podcast through archive.org is just being like, at least there's something, like, at least there's a better chance of this existing in the future, like these discussions existing in the future. If I put it on archive, than if I didn't.
And just speaking of the Internet Archive, this digital future we're in is great, but we're depending on one entity right now to save all of it. And that's a little bit terrifying. I don't know what bad things happen if the wrong person takes over leadership over there, or the wrong person dies over there, and
that actually happened in the Doom community. Like the person who was maintaining the Doom archive, the Doom WAD archive, actually died recently. Somebody took it over, but that was like a tremendous worry that was going to go away, because it was basically one person doing all the brunt of the work.
And video games got old enough that people are dying fairly regularly now. So we're losing a lot of video game history too. I mean, I think Ralph Baer dying was a big wake up call for everybody. I hope, anyway.
I mean, Iwata dying.
Oh, Iwata dying was huge. And it's like he wasn't even that old, but I mean,
there's a lot of history that
it's not new anymore.
There's a lot of history that Gunpei how do you pronounce his name?
I believe it's Gunpei Yokoi.
There's probably a lot of interesting information about the history of Nintendo that we could know from him if he hadn't died 20 years ago.
Or from anyone who's ever worked at Nintendo. None of them talk. I believe. Have you ever read Game Over?
No, I mean, I've heard of the book. I've never read it.
It came out in '93, I believe, and the author David Sheff interviewed a ton of people from Nintendo Japan and America for a New York Times article, but he turned it into a book. My understanding is that Nintendo was not happy with the book, and I actually believe that Nintendo shutting its doors to conversations started in 1993, and we're still seeing the effects of that. And that's why so much of the information that we have about Nintendo is comes from that book, from what I understand. Yeah, no, absolutely. Like almost every first-hand account from inside of Nintendo came from that book. We need to. I need to talk to David Sheff, the author, and just see if he still has any of his raw material from that, because it's this is probably the only time that a lot of these people will ever be interviewed. Is there another interview with another real interview with Minoru Arakawa, the NOA president? I don't know. I don't know of one. That's the one I know of. But that's one of many challenges in video game preservation, and something I've learned starting this thing is to try to publicly admit my limits, because I think when you start the Video Game History Foundation, people put everything they can think of into that. There's this expectancy that if there's a rare thing that, send it to Frank, he'll take care of it. There's an expectancy that we're actively trying to solve the problem of preserving digital games.
All the work goes on to you, basically,
right?
Or all the responsibility to do this.
Yeah, and it's the reality is that it's one person.
It's like doing activist work, honestly. That's what happens. It's if someone's a high profile activist, then a lot of work tends to fall on them, because everyone thinks of them as a superhero.
Right. And what I try to make very clear lately is that what we focus on is the stuff that I'm good at. and the stuff that I'm good at is ephemeral things from the 20th century. You know, like that's my specialty, and that's not the future of the company, because, you know, hopefully this thing grows and has, you know, employees and one day an actual CEO instead of someone with CEO on his business card, me. But, you know, like right now I have to focus on what I'm good at, because that's what I can have the most impact with, and it's also what can keep me happy, which I think is something that I've come to understand that I have to value, is my happiness in my work. And so when people, you know, want to interview me about how do we save online games, it's like I can refer you to Stanford, where they've started that program, or I can tell you my, you know, weird theories on how I think that's more preserving an event as opposed to a game. But we're not doing any of that. I can't. I don't have time. I have a huge backlog of the easy win stuff that I'm good at already. So yeah, that's been, you know, there's a constant pressure obviously associated with that too, because like there's so much video game history that needs saving, and I feel like a lot of people expect that now that, you know, Frank's got a company, he's on it, but it's like not really. I mean, like now that I have a company, I have more time to do what I've always been doing, but I don't really have the resources to solve all the problems. And
yeah, it's work that has to be done by a lot of different
people.
And
if I have a roadmap for the Video Game History Foundation, I try to be very like fluid in what we do. Like I want to evolve with the times. I don't want to ever be stuck, you know, preserving what's important to me as opposed to the world. But if I have a grander vision, it's that we're a foundation more in the traditional definition, which is a nonprofit that provides grants and resources to the people doing the work. And I think that's a very new idea in video games. I think the idea of hey, maybe collectors shouldn't have to spend thousands of dollars to rescue one-of-a-kind games. Maybe that should be the work of of grant money. I think that's new in video games, and that's, you know, what I hope I can kind of innovate. Or like, you know, the thought that like, hey, maybe MAME drivers would get better if people were compensated for their time. You know?
Yeah. Well, yeah, like, I mean, emulation in general, I mean, it's something that people are doing for pretty much exclusively non-commercial purposes. They're doing it because they feel like it's important.
Right. And I think a lot of the people who work on MAME team would, I would imagine, happily leave the day jobs they have to have, you know?
Well, they're also not getting paid for companies that resell emulation on MAME or some other, you know.
And that's license to license. And some people are stealing things that are commercial, and some are stealing things that are, well, if you're stealing MAME, it's like, who are you going to actually compensate? You know, like with MAME, it's like, just do the right thing and follow the GPL3 guidelines, you know, like provide source code for your changes and link to it. It's not fucking hard. Sorry, I don't. Yeah. That's our first swear word of the podcast. I don't think you care.
No. I feel like I swear all the time. I'm surprised I did not sworn more.
But yeah, it took people stealing emulators for me to go there.
Well, there was that talk that you gave at GDC where you said that Nintendo, like on the Nintendo's virtual console, the like header file of Super Mario had the same header file as like a readily available ROM. And you were not suggesting that they just downloaded the ROM, but that it looked kind of that way.
Right. Well, it's like, it is a proprietary header format that we use for quote unquote amateur emulation of NES games. It was created by an emulation author, and things are in a very specific order that he wrote, and to find that in a package that Nintendo sold, I mean, what other... Okay, the only conclusions you can come to are, one, they're cribbing emulation formats from the community to figure out themselves how to do it, or two, they're literally downloading ROMs from the internet. Either way, it's like and that's something that frustrates me also, is this belief that emulation done at, like, if you work for the company called Nintendo, that your emulator for Nintendo games is somehow better than the emulators that have evolved over literal decades, from a communal pool of resources. Nintendo's virtual console emulation it's fine. It's not better, and sometimes it's worse.
Well, it's people who are tasked to figure out something on their own that has been, or maybe they're using. People have been pooling resources and sharing information with each other on like online forums and stuff for a really long time. And there's all kind of like an almost like collectivist mindset to it, which is really an interesting way to think about it. But yeah, like a private company like coming in with hiring developers who don't necessarily have experience within that community to figure that stuff out is not necessarily most of the time going to be as good as people who have been sharing information for a long time and have all that knowledge.
Yeah, and I would honestly include our own products at Digital Eclipse in that equation. It's like we're not better than the people who do this on an amateur level. Like it's it's all a collective pool of knowledge that evolves over the internet. And
I mean, that's why sharing that information is so important and so crucial to like preserving this stuff. I feel like we should end the conversation there because we've been going for like 2 hours now.
Oh, whatever.
Okay. Well, we should talk about this more sometime in person, but that's at least a good introduction into this discussion, for people who are interested. And if you're interested, obviously check out the website for the the Video Game History Foundation, which is just gamehistory.org.
I can't believe that was available. I was so happy.
And you're gonna have like articles and stuff.
Actually, I wanted to ask you. You mentioned that there were a couple Color Dreams games that you liked the art on. You mentioned Pesterminator. Was there another one?
It was like a one with the boats or something. It was like it had some nautical theme on it.
King Neptune's Adventure.
Yeah, I think that's
so. The reason I wanted to bring that up is that by the way, we have a writing fund also, and that's where a lot of our content comes from, which is sort of, I mentioned that the future I want to provide grant money for stuff. This is sort of the baby step toward that, which is we pay writers to interpret history.
I saw that you interviewed the artist for some of those games.
Yeah.
Wow. I didn't realize it was the same person.
Yeah, Nina Stanley did almost all of the pixel art at Color Dreams.
Interesting.
And I find her art interesting, as you do. And so I thought it was worth like having someone interview her, not from the perspective of tell us about video game history, but from the perspective of her being an artist and where her inspirations come from. And so that was the idea there. But anyway, we have a writing fund, and there's content coming out there all the time. But what we tend to focus on is content that proves out the premise of the Video Game History Foundation, which is that we can discuss history in much more interesting and enlightening ways if we access contemporary material from around the time of that video game. So a lot of the articles are like trying to interpret history through stuff like the reviews of the games at the time, or advertising. We have this really great series that an author, Kate Willert, just started going through sort of the history of video game advertising, starting at the very, very beginning. Anyway, there's a lot of cool content there. So go check it out. And there's big old link to the writing fund if you are interested in contributing. But also, if you're interested in contributing and you've emailed me about that in the last 4 months, I'm so sorry I haven't replied to you yet.
Well, thank you, Frank. And the Street Fighter 30th anniversary collection is coming out at some point.
I have no idea when, but okay. Yeah, Capcom.
At some point,
Capcom's selling it this year. Yeah, my work wrapped up on it a long time ago, and I just kind of stopped paying attention. Yeah.
Well, this has been a really good conversation. I'm glad that we've been able to talk about some of this stuff, and like I think it's really important to have these conversations in some sort of public venue. I guess like a podcast is not exactly a public venue, but it's nice to have these sorts of conversations recorded, because I think a lot of people are thinking about this kind of stuff but aren't necessarily talking to each other about it.
No, absolutely. And what was enjoyable for me about this particular podcast, I've been on other podcasts, but like I think there's a lot to the friend to friend conversation, and that the comfort level, for example, right now for me is very high. And I think that because we know each other, you're able to get some real truth out of me. And I don't know, I think that's important. And I'd like to see more peer-to-peer stuff like this, as opposed to host to subject,
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I am not shy about sharing information about my life or whatever on here, and some people don't like, some people think it's interviewer heavy, but whatever. Yeah. It's just a venue for discussion. But yeah, most of the people I have on here are people I'm friends with in some aspect or another, and even the people who I'm not friends with, I feel like we've had friendly conversation. Who I don't really know outside of having them on this podcast. I feel like I've had friendly conversation.
Yeah, and I think it's important, and it's we'll talk about this after the recording, I guess, but it's something I think we're going to start pretty soon over here. So
cool. Well, thank you, Frank. I'll put the info for your Twitter and everything in the description, and this will be on my Patreon and archive and YouTube probably. But thanks again, Frank, for coming on.
Thank you.